So we were talking about judgment. It's prolific, but I think you're right. Like, there's no consciousness of how frequently it comes up. So let's start with sort of an example. And this, in old times with the Hebrews, all the Muslims, the Hebrews, ancient peoples, they understood that it was part of life in this following sense. So what's involved, if we unpack judgment, what's involved, you can think of it as the difference between the accusative and the judging. So if you accuse someone, so you're judging that, for example, someone threw something over your fence and you're accusing them, they can be judgmental, not anything to do with discerning. So why there's sort of a moral tinge to judging is whether you're weighing up the other person and then accusing them of something. Like at work, X and Y, and she's very impatient with me. So you're claiming something in an accusative tone about that. And they can be then weighed up with the scale of values. I should or shouldn't I do that? So even to weigh that, should I be accusing her or not? The police do this all the time in discerning crime from normal activity. Is should we or shouldn't we accuse them? So every possible act of accusation involves discerning whether there's a sort of abrogation, a violation or not. So you have to perceive, observe, and in perception and observing, take in information and then sift and sort that. Now that's not observation, that's judging it as in the sense of distinguishing and separating the data, like what's before you, and then have a sense that she's telling the truth and therefore he did jump over the fence and threaten her. So then you can make an accusation towards a charge, to charge the young lad. So the charge comes late in crime, but we first have to accuse them of committing, etc. Was it committing or not committing? So to come to that, just the simple act of the accusative moment, there's a whole set of processes in place, not merely perception, and you have to discern sort of something like the fictive from the true conditions. And then you say, but how do you come to the true? Through preconceptions. So then preconceptions are not the accusing element. It's something else that you bring to the moment. But do I know that I'm preconceiving? So self-judgment there is helpful and productive because you're showing that, am I bringing a preconception to the moment? Now, that involves discerning, but understanding it as it's mine and I've imported, that's a judgment. It looks like a conclusion. I arrived at the conclusion, but you're becoming aware that, oh, okay, no, it's not me, it's actually a violation. So the problem with fake truth is that everything is merely my preconception brought into it, and there's no discernible truthfulness in the happening. The happening is merely all me imposing it onto the happening. Whereas here you can understand the happening as an event, judge what part of it is my preconception of it, and it's got nothing to do with the accusation, which comes much later. It's whether I have imported it into the moment. Another element that is of judgment is intentionality. So self-judge. Not I judge myself, but in the sense of what sort of intention am I bringing to this moment? So my intention is to discern the truth, to be able to accuse the violator of a crime. And then you might say, for the philosopher, in the policeman, my intention is to be unbiased in discerning truthfulness, to finding truth as is. That's an intention. So you've called it. As soon as you make that calling, you've made a judgment that it should be clear and distinct. So René Descartes, he called it as a clear and distinct moment. And therefore it's discernible event from intention. But all of that can be, it's not popular to use that language, but that was what was always understood within the nomenclature of judgment. So it's not a who necessarily, it's a what. It's not I'm judging someone, a who, but to judge a circumstance, a moment, a feeling. You could judge a feeling. So it's not my right to judge someone. It's a judgment. And that's the postmodern thing, irony. Because postmodernism is irony, right? So it's not right to judge others. So I will preclude myself from judging, and it's good to be neutral, and I will only observe and describe. So only observe, only describe is a value, and values are not neutral. All values, and the expression is, it's a value judgment. You're judging value as in good, and then saying that relation to that, it's good if I'm not imposing upon another my values. But that's the hidden value, that it's good. The value is don't judge, to not use my value, which I am using, to impose upon you while I am imposing upon you. So that's the contradiction of libertarianism. So in a sense, it's explicable, but inescapable. Explicably inescapable. We have to distinguish. We have to discern. And even now what I'm doing is I'm discerning the modes of language that necessarily involve the judging act in its So when you see it through evil eyes, it's to be avoided. You've already placed the value of it, that it's evil, and so let's pull back and retract and not engage with judgment because it's judging another. So when you flip it and you say, well, just flip it. Why talk about judging? Why not just be and accept others? So how do you understand acceptance? That's a judgment. I judge acceptance, meaning I weigh it up in a certain manner, which I'm not telling you about, but I weigh it up in a certain manner, and I call it as so-and-so. And then when I call it and then acceptable. They're all mini judgments within the one call. But then I must act as if I'm not judging. So it's a kind of parade, it's a masquerade. When intent was, the apparent intent was to live with another and not offend them. But the most offensive thing you can do is to be false and untruthful about what you're employing, conscious or otherwise. So Nietzsche or someone would say, own up, good conscience, he calls it. Own up and say, I've made a series of mini judgments, and so because I don't want to judge you, let me tell you that I've already judged it to be good, not to judge you, but to merely accept you. Meanwhile, I really think you're a moron, but I can't tell you that because that would be judgmental, and I've judged judgmentalism to be a bad thing. In a lack of truthfulness, a masquerade cannot be considered ill or corrupt. So even there, like, you have to discern, is the corruptible? If nothing is corrupted and corruptible, and it's just everything is neutral, you discern that how. Give me your how. So we need a how, what, when, where, and who. All those I've just drawn are distinctions. Distinctions allow judging, and judging allows distinctions. But I think in a spirit sense, in a Geist sense, what's behind all that verbal, logico-verbalism is fear. We're just fearful to be so honest that we are animals that draw distinctions, and we like to name our distinctions. That's vile, that's gross, pop language. Okay? Wow, that's really sick. Actually, you love it, but it's really sick. See? So you're fearing ultra absolute truth, and you're much more judging masquerade to be comfortable and leisurely and chilling and cool, which is a judgment.
So we kind of indulge the illusion because we're afraid of the truth, ultimately. And what postmodernism, that's a big claim, postmodernism is essentially founded in fear.
So it wouldn't know that, so it couldn't claim that for itself because it wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
And it would have to discern its own self-identity, which it is denying the basis, the foundation of discernibility. So it would say, well, maybe it's a state of irony. Why are we worried about what is? Maybe it's ironic that I'm being judgmental while I'm being anti-judging. So ha-ha, let's just celebrate ha-ha. Why do you, Robert, why do you want to be so substantial? Ease up, man. It's just play. It's all ironic play. So we've passed nihilism. It's not exactly Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Hegel stuff. Like ease off, don't be so Hegelian, but and with the death of God, it's just go with it, and it's ironic. At some stage, I will be loose and free and tolerant and accepting, and then other times I just wish to masquerade. But who are you to draw the distinction? Must we have distinctions? So the problem is that it's a false joyfulness. It seems light, bearing no weight, quirky, quippy, quirky, not so epistemically driven that I must know. The valuing of knowing is not that inflated, it's deflating that. It's not necessarily about feel good and pleasure, but it would say, well, if many things go in the variety, see the problem with the variety angle is why not just laze about, not do much, be unemployed? If there is variety, well, I shall just be that. And it's all a masquerade anyway, because we don't really know Aletheia. So why are you saying to me, why are you throwing into my face, Aletheia, etc., as an unemployed bum? It's the way I value it and the way I see it. And the way you see it, I'm not judging you, I'm not allowing you. Sure, you can see it the way you want to, that I'm oppressing your tax base by being unemployed, and that's your right, but let me do mine. So what's been stated there, and I didn't state it, but it's being stated, is there shall be apartness, and the twain shall just be irresolvable. We don't have to resolve them. You are my other, and I'm other to you, and so it shall be. Now there's a truth statement, but it's been taken as a given. And then the second givenness is liberal within postmodernism. Postmodernism is it's my right to be atomic. I accord you, although I'm not telling you, but I do need a foundation, but I'm according it to you, your atomicity, your singularity. Yeah? And you unto you, me unto me. And so why judge me? And that's the root of it. don't judge me, man, because it's assumed that beingness, the ontology of being, is that we are separate, we are atomized, and I cannot project onto you or impose upon you. When the ontology could actually be intermingling, Asiatic, Oriental, mystic and otherwise esoteric intermingling, which we had for 5,500, 6,000 years.
So what? Postmodernism, atomism, separation, continued diuresis.
That's why it's That's why it's based on fear.
Right.
When you have separation, it engenders fear. When you have intermingling and unison, it engenders trust. So instead of why are you at me judging me, it's more like I care for you, and so I'm watching and respecting your discernibility. I honour your discernibility power.
So postmodernism really can't do love.
It can do it in a haphazard, chaotic way, incoherent and polyphonic, but the problem is that it will say instead of love, there are just loves, and there are just kinds of loves, and a situation will determine what kind, but not you. You can't tell me, and she can't tell me, and there's no God to tell me. But here, as it unfurls in this moment, in this time now, in this very second now, in this very moment right now, it is this kind of love. So a prostitute with a client, it's appropriate for that second, and you can't judge it because you're not her, nor are you in the circumstance. So there's a kind of, we know it as, following Descartes, we know it as volitional solipsism. You cannot call it unless you are the agent themselves. So in aletheic terms, there are categories, that's imposing categories, and that means that if you're outside the category, that is, you're not the agent herself, you're not the client themselves paying for the event, then you're an outsider, you're the other. And it also assumes that action can only be measured upon, you can only ever take on action as activity if you are subject with their subjectivity. Does the prostitute sense fulfillment or purpose in having a client? So who are you to say? And what that calls upon is the volitional structure behind that there is only a sort of inner secret not available to you. It's only in her mind, it's only in her body, and she owns her body, not you. So really postmodernism is a kind of neoliberalism. It's liberal in a new phase, a new guise.
A kind of materialistic, underlying materialism.
Individualistic, materialistic, in your face existentialism with a dose of irony. It's a Nietzsche would say it's a N valuation. It's in valuing the sarcastic and the ironic rather than the foundational and the deeply, or the esoteric and the mystical.
So is that the alternative then?
Yeah. And there's no telos, so there's no end. You don't fight for the republic, you don't fight for the temple, you don't fight for doctrine, dogma, you may not even fight for yourself. It's not really clear in postmodernism if there is a subject, a self, intrinsic self. There are ephemeral experiences, and man, be in the moment, man. That's maybe a bit strong, but it has tinges of that. So you see the distinctions are my distinctions. It sounds like a flurry of no distinction, man, please, no discernment. But you're actually discerning. He's judging her for prostitution. So you've already discerned it and you called it, but not wishing to come up honest and declare it honestly. So when it says solipsism, it's that there's no... So the yardstick, the metron, is missing. There's no value scale. The problem is that the church used to monopolize the scale and say, up in the sky there's one yardstick, and just have faith and we will give you the yardstick. Solipsism collapses it in on the self while also denying the self and says, only what I feel, I experience and what I exist is real. But mostly for me. I can't tell you what's real for you. So it's imploding philosophy. It's a philosophy of implosion. Values do exist, inward. Distinctions do exist, inwardly. I do them, not the yardstick, not the police, not the church, not the temple. So they seem absent when they're actually bourgeois, individualistic, solipsistic, deductive forms. I deduce my own, like spider, Descartes, Aristotle. I weave my own web. It comes out, the silk, spiders produce their own silk from the innards. Postmodernism is Spider-Man.